Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, wassalatu wassalamu ala ashrafil anbiya al-mursaleen, amma ba'd. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah to everyone. This session we are going through the Qasida al-Munfarijah, and we've completed the first two couplets, so now we're on the third couplet. And for each of the couplets, just for people who haven't joined us before, we're going through a poem called al-Munfarijah by a sheikh by the name of Ibn Nahwi. This week, there are a few preliminary points before we get on to the. There are a few kind of preliminary points that I want to cover before we get onto the actual couplet itself. Today's lesson is, and the couplet is about fear. Yeah. So we've talked about empowerment. We talked about a couple of things. This is today's lesson. The main kind of thrust of the lesson is on when we're thinking about trauma and calamities and difficulties in our life. And I want to mention these preliminary points because I think it's really important. It's very easy to get lost in this very dense topic, and probably for a lot of people, it's something that that probably will raise more questions than probably answers, because it's the manifestation of fear is so personal to different people, and obviously it's very hard to be able to sum it up in one session, but I will do my best to talk a bit about the role of fear. And on that note, I mean, my first point for everyone to really think about is fear is natural. And it may seem obvious to a lot of people, but just in case people think that we're trying to eradicate fear, we're really not. The absence of the existence of fear is in no way indicative of your relationship or your lack of relationship with God. Okay, fear is a very natural thing that we all have. We don't necessarily suffer from. Suffer from implies that it's a bad thing, and actually it really isn't. Yeah, the trouble is when fear is misdirected. When fear is misdirected, it can be very unhealthy. It can be very damaging. It can be debilitating for a lot of people. And actually, when it is, that's when we have terms for it, right? We have these specific codes, diagnoses, where people's kind of sense of fear becomes debilitating, such that you can't function in your day-to-day. And I think that makes sense, because fear, when it's appropriate, is a instinctive, natural response. It's a very primal response, in fact. Yeah, fear is the thing that we need in order to survive. So it's a primal instinct. If we didn't have fear, we would have died out many. The animal kingdom would never have survived. Yeah, so animals live because they have this sense, this inhibitor that exists, which stops them from doing something stupid. In the same way as human beings, just imagine all of us at some point have been in, we've been told off by a parent when we were young. A parent's told us off for maybe crossing the road without looking, or running out, from the front door, or doing something silly, which was very risky. But at the time, our kind of barometer of risk wasn't very refined. Yeah, when you're young, it's not very refined, which means what an adult calculates as a risk for a child is curiosity. So the manifestation of fear for a child is actually in the form of curiosity. And when you're young, that sense of curiosity can completely overwhelm your ability to sometimes see what is dangerous and what's not dangerous. Yeah. So just imagine if that impulsive need to see what's across the road, if that wasn't something that was socialized out of you, just imagine a society where everyone runs on impulse. Just imagine how unhealthy that society would be, because that's what it is. Without fear, you live entirely on impulse. You stop making constructive long-term decisions to start with, because the moment your impulsive self takes over, you stop thinking about the long-term gain. You think about the immediate gain. Yeah. So, and that's important, because that is the very distinction between humans and animals. Humans have the ability, we're the only creature known to mankind that has the ability to plan ahead. Yeah, we're not hardwired in that way. we have the ability to plan, and the extent to which we plan is really down to our imaginations. Animals may do it, for example, when it comes to hibernation, but that's not a plan that they make. That's hardwired. That's in their DNA. That when they feel a certain way, or when the temperature changes, that they behave a certain way. That's hardwired within them. It's not something it's not constructed for animals, which is why you can have a wild cat somewhere in Africa, and you can have my cat, which is actually, she's sitting next to me here. And they have certain impulses which are completely hardwired. They behave in the exact same way. If you show them certain, I guess if you were to, if I was to, and I've actually tried this in the past, where you show them something which may be in the wild perceived as dangerous, she will react the same way a wild cat would react, because it's hardwired inside of her. Human beings have the ability to plan, to think ahead. We have choice. We can choose to plan, or we can choose not to plan. But if that was completely taken away from us, where we were completely impulsive and we weren't hardwired in the way the animal kingdom is hardwired, well, we wouldn't survive very long. We just would not survive. And if we did, it wouldn't be a very healthy, good society to live in, because nobody would plan for the future. Everyone would be planning for the moment, which would make it a very much a nafs orientated, individualistic society, and it's about immediate gain. It would not be a pleasant society for anyone to live with. And so fear is a very natural response. We have lots of terms that we've normalized for it when we're happy with the fear. So for example, when you say if you say I'm a very structured, organized person, when you say I'm an organized person, what that actually means is I'm afraid of being disorganized. Yeah, because to you, the opposite of being highly organized is chaos. And chaos is scary because you don't know how to function in chaos. So we use the opposite term for it. We call it organized, and somehow that just seems like it's more palatable. Or when we try and work to gain and aspire, aspiration itself fundamentally comes down to a fear of failure. Right? It's not a bad thing. I don't mean it to sound like a bad thing. And perhaps the phrasing isn't, with more time, I'd probably phrase it slightly differently. But I hope at its core, you understand what I'm saying, which is what we've done is we've badged certain accepted fears in more positive language. And that's a good thing, because my point is that whatever you want to call them, whether you call them fear, whether you call them ambition, or being highly structured, or whether you call it acceptance, because that itself, the need for acceptance is, it's something that, again, as a society, we all accept is a need that a very basic need that all human beings have, and we want to be accepted by our peers, because we're fundamentally social creatures. In the same way, for many of us, validation, the need to be told that actually you're doing a good job, that sense of validation is extremely important. All of these do stem to a large extent from fear, and they are very important, because people who need validation, if you don't give them validation, they actually will be whereas somebody who doesn't necessarily require it to the same extent, they won't read into that. They won't create a void out of that lack of validation. Somebody who happens to need validation, if you don't offer them that validation, they will fill that void with negativity. Yeah, they'll fill that void with negativity. And it's often probably I would say it's often a cause for dispute between spouses, where one of them perhaps requires more validation than the other. So there's a need for, if it's not being properly managed by the spouse, then it can turn into a very toxic situation, because some people really do need validation, and you can't socialize that out of people either. That's something that is, again, not necessarily hardwired into our DNA, but it's actually part of our personality. It's part of who we are. Yeah, it's a part of who we are, and to try and strip that out of us, it means to try to change ourselves. So people who try and live outside their personality, there's an outer shell of a personality, which is, you can do personality tests, or all these kind of lots of hundreds of different personality tests out there, and you can do that, and that will probably get you the kind of superficial outer shell of what I mean. And I suppose you can do that, because some people who are very introverted can behave very, can start to act as extroverts if they are forced in that situation for long enough. But your comfort zone is still being an introvert. What I'm talking about is something a bit more at the core of who you are. Yeah. So I'm talking about your very principal personality traits. So we do believe that they are fundamentally, even those personalities are formed based on the core, and that core, according to many psychologists, are five personality traits. Some say four, and the Muslims talked about this for many centuries before modern psychologists have ever got wind of it. To be fair, and we talked about these. So I'm not going to go into the kind of the crux of to go into that in any detail. Fear is natural, and I'm certainly not going to be talking about removing or eradicating fear. But where fear is misdirected, that's when it becomes a problem, because when fear is misdirected, it can inhibit to the extent that actually that inhibition isn't an appropriate inhibition where it stops you from being impulsive, but what it actually does is it becomes debilitating, where you can't function anymore. So fear that's debilitating is problematic fear. And that's the focus of, I guess, this couplet, which is when fear is misdirected and it becomes debilitating and it's the result of trauma, then that's what this next couplet is about. Yeah, that's what the next couplet is about. And I want to also just reassure people, because there's a beautiful hadith. There's a beautiful hadith in which Sayyidina Abu Umama, this is narrated in Sahih Bukhari, and there's a slight variant in Sunnah Abu Dawood. So Abu Umama, he is sitting at the masjid. He's sitting at the door of the masjid on the footsteps, and the Prophet ﷺ comes, and he says, the Prophet ﷺ asked him, said, why are you sitting here so early? It's not even the time for prayer yet. And that's interesting, because it shows that the Sahaba would turn up to the masjid and wait for the prayer when the time of the prayer entered. So when the Prophet said to him, why are you sitting here? It's not even the time for the prayer yet. Sayyidina Abu Umama, he said, Ya Rasulullah, he said, I'm afraid, I feel anxious. I feel anxious because life's getting on top of me. My debts are getting on top of me. Yeah. So the Prophet ﷺ taught him a dua. Yeah. He said, Allahumma inni a'udhu bika. Oh Allah, I turn to you, I seek refuge with you from what? A'udhu bika min al-hammi wal-hazan. Min al-hammi wal-hazan. That I seek refuge with you from two things, from ham. Ham is anxiety. Yeah. And hazan is sadness. Yeah, hazan is sadness, but when it's prolonged, the word hazin is actually often translated also as depression. Yeah, so we're asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from protection from these two things, ham and hazan. The reason why I mention it is the hadith doesn't say, and I seek refuge from fear, because that's what the Sahabi asked. I said, I'm afraid. I feel, the way he described it was that he was afraid for his situation. Prophet rather focused on the two things that were important, which is anxiety. In other words, when fear transforms into something that becomes debilitating, that's the problem. Yeah. So it's when it becomes anxiety, ham, and hazan, which is when it becomes prolonged hazin, when somebody has this constant melancholic attitude to life that stems from this whatever difficulty they're going through, right? Rather than doing something about it. In other words, accepting it and living with it, rather than trying to do something about it when it's within your means. So the Prophet ﷺ taught this dua, Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min al-hammi wal hazan, and it continues, and from the Prophet said, and from and from laziness, and a few other things which I'll go on to shortly, inshallah. So that's something just to bear in mind, that we're not trying to solve or remove fear. The other thing that I just want to touch on is another beautiful hadith where Sayyida Aisha narrates this. She says, I went to the Prophet ﷺ, and this shows, actually the way she phrased it was really nice, because it shows how she would ask him questions. She says, a bit like, when you sometimes like, I don't know, with a couple of friends, and you're having one of those, you know, if you've got friends that you've known for many years, like, you know, for you know, I've got friends that I've known since the age of 4 or 5. Now you can be sitting on a sofa with them, and you don't even need to say a full sentence because you just know what each other means, right? And sometimes you might do this with your friends where you don't say it in a full sentence, but you already know. So, you know, you sit in there and you might say something like, I don't know, something random like, you know, blue or green, and the person automatically assume they already know what you mean. Whereas most people will say, what do you mean by blue or green? Your friend knows it, what you're asking is, if I had to choose a color, which one would it be, blue or green? You know, something random like that, where you just say 2 words and the person just kind of works out what you mean, and then it turns into a bit of a game. Yeah. It's nice because the way she phrases this almost is like that, because there are quite a few narrations where she does this. She says, Ya Rasulullah, she says, so just starts with this. She says, a person who gives what God has given him. Yeah, in other words, gives ma'atahu, meaning whatever God has bestowed upon him, he shares it. And fi qalbihi wajila, and in his heart is wajila. Wajila is like is where the heart is awakened. Yeah, it comes from a verse of Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, innamal mu'minuna alladhina idha dhukira Allahu wajilat qulubuhum. You know, the believers are those who, when the Quran is recited, their hearts begin to shake, to tremble. In other words, they are wajila, they become awakened. وَإِذَا تُلِيَتْ عَلَيْهِمْ آيَاتُهُ زَادَتْهُمْ إِيمَانًا. So she asks, the person of wajila. So she says, a person who has gives in the way of God and has wajid in his heart, or a drunkard person that fornicates and has, you know, and yes, a drunkard person that fornicates. Which of those? She just stops there, expecting the answer is obvious, and the Prophet said neither. He said, rather, a person who fasts, prays, and gives sadaqah, and is afraid that God might not accept it. So he doesn't even answer the full question. He knows what she means, and he goes to the third. And that for me is very powerful, because I think what that teaches us, Allahu Alam, as a reflection, is she gave 2 extremes. And the reality is most people don't live on those 2 extremes, thankfully, in at least one of those instances. Most of us live in the middle, which is that we just do what we can and we fear that it might not be enough. Again, the Prophet ﷺ here used the word khawf, but he uses it in a very positive sense, that fear can be a good thing. Somebody who prays and fasts, and this has come up a few times as students, you know, people have asked, you know, I'm not sure if I'm doing enough. And I said to you, and each time I've been saying to people, especially in Kitab al-Adhkar, that do a bit and just try and do it consistently, and try and do better than what you did yesterday. Measure yourself against yourself yesterday rather than somebody else today. Yeah. Don't compare yourself to other people. Compare yourself to where you are as compared to where you were a day ago, a week ago, a month ago, a year ago. So he says, rather, it's better to be fasting, praying, and giving sadaqah, and being afraid that God might not accept it. Yeah. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us of people who pray, who fast, and who give sadaqah, inshallah. The couplet is, وَصَحَابُ الْخَيْرِ لَهُ مَطَرٌ فَإِذَا جَاءَ الْإِبَّانُ تَجِي. So if I just read it, you'd probably wonder what's this got to do with fear. It translates as وَصَحَابُ الْخَيْرِ, and the clouds of khair, which are goodness, لَهُ مَطَرٌ, that they contain rain. Sahabul khair are what are known as, in Arabic, that's a dark cloud. Yeah, a heavy cloud. Yeah, the Quran used another word from this. Thaqal is used, or thiqal. Thiqal means heavy clouds. It's rain clouds. So although they call it sahabul khair, or he calls it sahabul khair, which is the clouds of goodness, what he means is those really dark, heavy clouds that are full of rain. فَإِذَا جَاءَ الْإِبَّانُ تَجِي, when those dark clouds come over you, he says, فَإِذَا فَإِذَا جَاءَ الْإِبَانُ, but when the time comes, when God commands, when the moment, the allotted time comes, taji, the heavens open and the rain comes down. In other words, those very dark clouds that you were afraid of are become the source of your of your sustenance. And there's a few points here that we need to we can reflect on. One is the use of the word sahab. Like, why does the Shaykh use it? The reason why he uses it is because in the Quran, the cloud is often used as a symbol of intelligence. Yeah, it's a symbol of intelligent people recognizing the value of a cloud. Yeah, so the cloud is at face value. If you just see a dark cloud, you may be afraid of it. Yeah, you may be afraid of it. In fact, the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about when he says, "Huwa alladhi yurikumul baraka khawfan wa tama'a," and it is he who shows you the lightning, so, and you fear it. Yeah, you fear it. But watama'a, but also you become hopeful. وَيُنْشِئُ السَّحَابَ الثِّقَالَ, and it brings with it, meaning the clouds bring with them, with their heaviness, water. That verse is actually about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala telling us that, clouds are for some people a symbol of fear, but equally for other people it's a symbol of hope. And this verse is about huwa alladhi yurikumul barak, that Allah says that there may be a people, a traveling community, for instance, people who are traveling through the desert, and then they see lightning in the sky, and that's a sign of a storm coming. So everyone in that caravan is panicked now because they have to suddenly stop, and they don't know how long the storm's going to last. They don't know how dangerous or how heavy the storm's going to be. They don't know whether they'll be able to get somewhere close enough to be able to, for food and for whatever else they need. All of these fears that would be running through their mind. So when they hear the lightning, they're afraid because they don't know what comes afterwards. But somewhere down in a village, there's a people who, when they hear that lightning, or when they see that lightning or hear that thunder strike, it's a time of celebration, because when they hear that, they know God is sending them water, because perhaps they've lived in a drought, they've not need, so the very cloud for them is a source of sustenance. So when they hear it, what happens? Tama'a. So you have khawfan wa tama'a. On the one hand, people who have khawf, fear, and the other hand, tama, which is home or hope or reliance in the, that it brings with it hope that maybe they will be delivered from their the difficulty that they're facing. So sahab is often, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about it in the Quran in a few places, but ultimately what it is, the sign for people who are intelligent. In other words, if you see a cloud and you see that cloud represents, it may at first appear to be full and scary, but beyond that surface, it carries with it the very essence of life itself. Yeah, water. Which is why the Sheikh makes reference to this cloud. Yeah, and the other thing kind of again in relation to this is that there's a beautiful verse where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "Wa asa an takrahu shay'an wa huwa khairul lakum," that perhaps there may be something that you dislike, wa huwa khairul lakum, and it is good for you. Wa asa an tuhibbu shay'an, and perhaps there may be something that you love, wa huwa sharrul lakum, but there's evil in it, there's harm in it. A bit like that cloud that you see, that you may see it and you're fearful of it, but really it represents hope and it represents life. But what you see on the outer shell is can be scary. Wallahu ya'lamu wa antum la ta'lamun. But know that God knows and you do not know. Yeah, God knows and you do not know. Now, وَسَحَابُ الْخَيْرِ لَهُ مَطَرٌ, that in kind of, if you link it up with the previous verses, what he's saying is that when somebody's going through a trauma, when somebody's going through difficulty, it's like this great big cloud that hangs over their head. It's a great big cloud that hangs over their head, and that cloud is what? That cloud is it's that darkness. It's the it's the it's how great the calamity looks in front of you. You can't see beyond it. You never know when that storm will come, and you don't know how it will ever end. Yeah, it's like looking into darkness. The reason why we're afraid of darkness is because we can't. Human beings need to understand. It's within our DNA to try and understand and control things. But when you look into the darkness, you don't know where it ends. That's the thing with darkness. It kind of goes against our instinct because it has no end that you can see. So it becomes never ending, and calamities like that, because when somebody's in trauma, they can't see the end of it. And we need to, deep down, you just need to be able to control it and understand. If someone can say that you're going through something now, but on day 6, and exactly day 6, you would be absolutely fine, you will manage that calamity very differently. Yeah, because you will have something to look forward to. You'd know that every day is a countdown. So human beings need that. We need to be able to somehow put something into some sort of structure, and that structure may be different for different people, but ultimately we need to be able to understand, and therefore that helps us kind of cope. That's a coping mechanism for us, but darkness does not allow us to do that. So Sheikh uses Sahabul Khair as that metaphor, which is if that darkness is a cloud that hangs over you, he says, rather than trying to get rid of that cloud, rather than trying to remove that calamity, rather than thinking that the way you control difficulties by giving it 6 days or 5 days or a week and telling yourself it'll be over, rather look at it differently. Look at that trauma itself as a symbol of hope. Yeah. In other words, that perhaps what you see as a calamity, asa an takrahu shay'an, perhaps the thing that you dislike, that you hate, within it carries something that's good for you. Like the dark cloud that carries within it rain. Yeah. Like the dark cloud that brings with it life. There's something interesting in Arabic, the word for, there are lots of words for fear in Arabic. The two common ones in the Quran, they're extremely common. The most common word is khawf. Yeah, khawf. La khawfun alayhim wa la hum yahzanun, for example. Khawf. Khawf appears in the Quran 124 times. Yeah, the word fear in the Quran appears 124 times. For example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Inni akhafu in asaytu rabbi adhaba yawmin azim, where I fear that by sinning against my Lord, that there will be adhaba yawmin azim, that there will be a punishment, a torment on that day. Or wa in tawallaw fa inni akhafu alaykum adhaba yawmin kabir. Another verse where Allah says, and if they turn away, then perhaps I fear that upon you there will be a reckoning on that great day. Inni akhafu alaykum adhaba yawmin alim. I fear upon you a great torment. So there's many. قالوا لا تخف إنا أرسلنا إنا أرسلنا إلى قوم لوط. إن في ذلك لآية لمن خاف عذاب الآخرة. So you'll notice the word keeps appearing near it. Khawf and azab. Khawf and azab. Every word I've read so far has what in it? Azab. إن في ذلك لآية لمن خاف عذاب الآخرة. Yeah, azab. So a lot of the time when khawf appears, it's attached to punishment. Yeah, that's the first thing. The other thing is, if you look at the root, this is probably more so for people who study Arabic, either with me or with somebody else. Look at the formulation of the word khawf. Khawf comes from 3 letters, kha, waw, and fa. Yeah, khawf. The middle letter of the word khawf is what's called in Arabic a weak letter. The waw and the ya are considered weak letters in Arabic. And the reason for that is because they transform really easily. They can be easily merged into other words. And those of you who study tajweed will know how ya is easily merged, the waw is easily merged. So these are letters that merge very easily or disappear when you need them to disappear. Like in khiftum, right? Khiftum comes from the root khawafa, but the waw has disappeared. So they're considered weak letters. The word khawf contains inside it a weak letter which can easily disappear. So actually the word khawf is hollow in the middle. Yeah. There's another word that's very similar to it and it sounds almost exactly like it. Jawf. The difference between the word jawf and khawf is what? Look, the jim has a dot in the center. The kha has a dot at the top. Yeah. The only difference between those words is the movement of the dot. Again, jawf is hollow in the middle. What does jawf mean? In Arabic, jawf means, it literally means the hollow part of the stomach. It's the stomach. Yeah, jawf means the hollow bit. So even the formulation of the letters indicate the meaning of the word. So jawf means something hollow. So the question is, what's hollow about khawf? Yeah, what's hollow about khawf? So the scholars say, and there's a number of opinions on this, they say khawf comes from a fear of the unknown. Yeah. In other words, it's hollow. You fear something you don't know. It's empty. It's a void. So you fear something that's been filled. So your fear comes from the void that you've created because you don't know. Yeah. It's the most common fear we have, which is why in the Quran appears 124 times, as compared to, for instance, as compared to another word, which is khashya. Khashya in Arabic comes from khashiya. Yeah. Kha, sheen, and ya. They both share something in common. They both share the kha at the beginning. They both share the kha at the beginning. Now, this is quite a it's not even probably to many even a science, but I'm fascinated by this, the kind of looking at how letters form in Arabic. But I accept that many people have issues with this as a science, but it does work often. So I find it interesting. And I'll give you one observation, which is, look, the word kha, the letter kha in Arabic, often appears at the beginning for something that's quite fundamental to the human makeup. Like the word khalq. Khalq means creation. It's fundamental to who we are. Yeah. Another word is khuluq. Khuluq is our character. Yeah. It's also quite and its essence is the fundamental part of what makes you you. So even khawf has a kha, which means which means what? It means that khawf has a place in your existence. It's a natural part of who you are. But equally, khashya does too. The difference is khawf comes from the unknown. And actually, that's very important as a survival mechanism because it stops you from making silly choices in life. Because what you do is you weigh up the pros and cons of possibilities in the future. So when you're deciding, do I go to this university or that university to study this degree or that degree, hopefully you weigh it up. Yeah. You don't impulsively just close your eyes and just land on a university. I hope people don't do that. You try and weigh it up, within whatever parameters that you have, like geography or like grades or whatever. But you do try and at least consider these things. So khawf has a place because it comes from things that you can't be certain about. You've got to try and plan, but accept that I don't know if it's going to work out that way. If you're planning for, if you want to enter, I don't know, if you want to study medicine, for instance, then you know that you have to plan a certain way and structure your life in a certain way to be able to get to med school. But you don't know if med school is going to happen or not. You don't know if you'll ever get a place. It may be you nail every grade, but the thing is you just happen to not get the interview or not pass the interview. So there's a lot of uncertainties around it, but you can't let those uncertainties stop you from making the effort, right? And that's the difference between people who succeed and people who fail. People who fail give in to the inhibition. Right? So where khawf does not serve its purpose for people, when people allow khawf to become debilitating, then it stops them from progressing in life. For other people, they manage khawf appropriately, which means that they have enough of it to act as a stimulus for them to do what they need to do, but not so much of it that it prevents them from actually taking the first step. Yeah. It can become debilitating, and nor do they get rid of it completely, where they behave impulsively, where they just think, I'll just revise the night before, who cares? Yeah, I'll pass anyway. I'll rely. I'm quite a intelligent person and so on. So you need to be able to use that very natural quality to your to your own success rather than to your detriment. Yeah, and that's within our control to do, by the way. That's perfectly within our control to do. Sometimes it requires a bit of a leg up, it requires a bit of help. Suhbah is extremely important for these things. If you are around impulsive people, guess what? You will behave impulsively. You won't become an impulsive person maybe, but you will behave impulsively, because what's happened is people around you have normalized that behavior. Yeah, but if you're around considered people, you will slowly begin to take on that trait, because we absorb. We are social creatures. They may not change your your innate character, but they will have enough of an influence of it, enough of an influence on you to program you to at least socialize in that way, which means that you start at least being a bit more considered. Yeah. So khawf is quite a hollow term because it comes from a lack of knowledge about something. Khashya, on the other hand, khashya in Arabic has the sheen in the middle. Sheen comes for words which often spread, look like the word, even if you haven't studied Arabic before, many of you will know the word shams. Shams means sun, but it begins with a sheen. And sheen, like fatafashi, they say fatafashi, right? It's a spreading letter, even in tajweed, the spreading letter, sha, you open your mouth. The sun spreads its rays, its heat. Shajar or shajara, the singular, which is a tree, because its branches spread. Yeah. So you find that the letter sheen indicates a certain meaning, and it's often found with words that are correlated with that meaning. So khashya has the sheen in the middle. It's not hollow, it's quite dense, and it spreads. And Allah tells us where khashya is used. Allah says, إِنَّمَا يَخْشَى اللَّهَ مِنْ عِبَادِهِ الْعُلَمَاء. That only those who know truly have khashya of Allah, they have fear of God. So the scholars say khashya stems from knowledge. So if khawf comes from the unknown, khashya comes from the known. So our job is not to eradicate fear. Our job is to, when it comes to khawf, is to use it to our gain rather than to our detriment. Not allow it to, not succumb to it. Yeah, not to succumb to it, but use it so that it acts as a motivator in your life. When tribulation hits you, you either be consumed by tribulation, or you use it as a springboard to become more motivated to do better things in your life. Yeah. If for example, if that pain comes from regret, if tribulation means that it amplifies regret, for example, if there's somebody that's passed away and you feel like you didn't spend enough time with them, or the last thing you said to them, you weren't, that stays with you, for example. Khawf would be where you create a void, right? So a void, and you fill it with what's going to be detrimental for you. In other words, what you do is you scorn yourself, and you spend the rest of your life scorning yourself. So you can do that, and I can't stop you from doing that. Nobody can, only you can. Yeah. But you need to accept that you have a choice, because you don't have to allow that to happen. You can turn that and tell yourself that actually I may not have used that person's lifetime as much as I should have. I may have not made the most of that person in my life. But now that they've passed away, I can dedicate more time in celebrating their life and doing things that will be good for them. So giving sadaqah in their name, every year trying to remember them at least in one dedicated gathering, trying to finish Quran with them for them once a year. If not for them, to at least use that as a stimulus to finish Quran, because it's in their name. So inshallah that they will get the reward for it. Yeah. So what you do is you stimulate and you create motivation. And then what happens is that void goes away, because all that void is the absence of you filling it with something. If you don't fill it with something, it will fill itself. The Prophet told us this. He says the heart is a vessel. If you do not fill it with good, it fills itself with what's harmful for your soul. So the absence of active promotion of what's good, better for you, that's promotion of what's for your well-being, for the good of your well-being, the result of that, so the absence of that leads to what will only ever be detrimental for you. Yeah. So the question really is, are we going to take a step forward and take control, or are we going to sit back and just let the world just do its worst to us, which was what could happen. And this poem, remember, the Sheikh's position is very clear. It's control what you can control, and he believes that khawf is something that you have within your power. You have the gift of using it to your advantage, and don't be a victim of tragedy, a victim of tribulation, a victim of pain, a victim of hardship. You can choose to be that, but remember, it is a choice. Or you can take it on as the cloud that brings you rain, that brings life, that sustains you, that is the means by which you better yourself and you motivate yourself to become a better person than you were before this tribulation. Is it similar to anxiety? Because anxiety can paralyze me. So again, I would say first and foremost, anxiety is a very normal, it's a very, very normal phenomenon that we all have. Anxiety is itself, it's a type of fear, yeah. But if you were not anxious, you just wouldn't be alive. We all have a sense of, the Quran tells us that, yeah. Allah tells us that He's created human beings, He created man as anxious souls. And whenever we're touched by harm, we panic. Human being, the Quran tells us that human beings have been created as anxious. I suppose, as I've said, when it comes to khawf, it's when it becomes debilitating, when it stops you from functioning, that's when it's gone beyond. It's just, the way to look at it is anxiety, fear, all of these traits, or whatever you want to call them, kind of the ups and downs, the peaks and troughs of life, are part of life. Yeah, they will come. And we are ordinarily, what we do is they act as a good sanity check, really, because sometimes when you feel anxious, it's because I care. So the reason why I'm anxious about an interview is because I care. I want this job. If I sat there and think, if it happens, it happens. It doesn't. Two things are happening. One of two things is happening. Either I really don't care, in which case, really a smart person would say, why are you even going for that job? Or the second, and far more likely, is that I'm pretending I don't care. It's a way of masking my anxiety. And most people fall into that second category. And you find people who are most anxious what they'll do is they'll cover it, they'll mask it. Extroverted people mask their anxiety by becoming super extroverted. So when you see somebody extroverted that just goes hyper, like almost manic, it's probably a sign that they are feeling extremely anxious, completely out of their comfort zone. And what they do is they turn up the dial on their extrovertness as a way of somehow masking it. So that's why introverted people sometimes go the other way. Introverted people will sometimes just fall within themselves. They become very reclusive internally. Yeah. The breaking point is when an extrovert, and it does happen, is when you have somebody when somebody who's hyper extroverted, if you push them over the edge, they go the opposite way, which they become extremely introverted. That's when you know you've basically broken that person. I don't mean broken in the sense that you've destroyed them. Broken in the sense that that person now, you've pushed them to their opposite extreme. Yeah, they're completely out of their comfort. They have no answers in that zone, and they fall into another zone. And so an example of this playing out is, I'm sure everyone knows of people, or maybe you are that person that's really timid, shy, very, timid, shy, and then amongst your friends, happy-go-lucky. Nobody would ever imagine you just completely, blowing your top. But there are certain relationships, and it's often with a spouse, that you just completely go berserk, right? Completely go, and you might think, that's not me. And the truth is, what's happened is, it is you, because your personality is one. But when somebody pushes you hard enough, you fall into the opposite extreme, such that you don't, and people say this often, that you don't even recognize yourself. Yeah, because what you've done is you stepped outside of you and you've gone to the opposite extreme. Yeah. So it manifests in these, so these are strange quirks of human beings that we can do this, where we can, behave in the most, all of us have our own kind of quirks in terms of what we do when we get, some people get really fidgety, some people get, the trouble is in most of these cases, you can manage, you can get through it. People who have anxiety, when you say anxiety, I'm going to not interpret it as that where somebody has those moments when they have hyper anxiety, because these things are part of life. What you need there is you need ways of managing it. And I'm not talking about paying somebody for a course on this. I'm saying sometimes it's the really simple stuff that you need to do. So a simple thing like so a piece of it. So one thing that I remember, a piece of advice was this that I recall from a few years ago, is some people when they get really nervous, they get really loud. Yeah. So as I said, so people who are extroverted. So I'm introvert, probably border, but I'm more introverted than extroverted, which people might not believe. Some people probably will believe it. But I do know many extroverted people. And what happens is when you get really nervous, your decibel levels go up, to the point that you can almost become very shouty. Yeah, extremely shouty. That's not very helpful in an interview, in a job interview. So when you're in a job interview, when you get shouty, then you're a mess, right? So the advice is just write on your hand, slow down and quieten down. And what you need to tell yourself, and you've got to train yourself to do this, because you can't just stumble into dealing with fear, with anxiety. You've got to train yourself in this. So that means sometimes, trying to recreate that moment. And you've got to train it. All you have to train yourself to do it is every 5 minutes, look at your hand. It's not super scientific, but what you want to do is get into this habit of looking at it, and not just looking at it because that's the bit it's easy to do. You can do that and train yourself to do that. It's looking at it and paying attention to it and focusing. When you get that, then suddenly you've solved the manifestation of your anxiety. You're not solving the anxiety because it's not a thing to solve. What you're doing is the manifestation of it. That, in other words, the bit that debilitates you, the bit that basically means you're throwing job interviews that you're perfectly able to get through if it wasn't for those moments. Yeah. What stops you from behaving so far out of your character that you don't even recognize it. It's the simple things that sometimes help. Where somebody has a constant anxiety such that it's debilitating, yeah, I mean, they can't perform very simple functions, like, just socializing. Simple things like if I'm in a room with somebody I don't know, I'm just in buckets of sweat, and I don't know what to say, I don't know how to speak or whatever. If that happens to the extent where it's debilitating, where you can't hold, you can't get a job, or you can't get a job, then that's when it's worthwhile speaking to a doctor and getting some probably more focused help. Yeah, because again, it's not that you need medication. It may be that one needs medication just to help them along. What it probably means is that you need a bit more focused help, where somebody just spends, rather than one session or one YouTube video, spends maybe 12 weeks with you and talks you through it. They try and understand what triggers you and then try and work you through the triggers. So that's the thing, you see. It's really about triggers. What are those triggers? And then how do you manage those triggers? And the way you manage those triggers is sometimes really, really simple. Now, I can tell you personally that there are things that make me anxious. And I have really, there are things that I do when I'm hyper anxious, and I've learned to control those because I've had to, you see. But if someone asked me today, and I hope nobody does, because I don't, I'd rather not answer it right now. But if someone said to me now, what does your anxiety look like? I can probably literally spell it out for you sentence by sentence, and because I've thought about it so much. And I've even sat with people and I've asked them, how do I do this? So that's one of the things that I do. I go to people that I respect, that I trust, that I love, and I ask them, look, what would you do in this instance? How would you go about doing this? And this is what happened. And sometimes just opening up and being honest about it, you'll be amazed at how much, you can get through. In other words, Sometimes anxiety doesn't require counseling. It doesn't require counseling. What it requires is coaching. Yeah, you need to be coached out of being debilitated by your anxiety rather than being counseled out of it. Yeah, counseling is someone's almost doing it to you. It feels that way. Coaching is about training you to manage it yourself so that you begin to see those triggers. And trust me, people who have anxiety, as I said, I've suffered from anxiety, not clinical anxiety, but there's been moments where I've felt like that, and I've learned to manage it. And I know now I can manage it in other instances, but there will be manifestations that I haven't come to terms with, and I will deal with it, like all of us do. So my advice to that person who has those anxieties that are debilitating is try and see if you know what your triggers are, and honestly start with the simple stuff. You'll be amazed. I can tell you personally, I've done really simple things. I'll give you one example. So one of my anxieties was I used to know this person. And he was super intelligent, like hype. This guy is one of the most intelligent people I've ever met. Yeah, in terms of his sheer ability to process information, and he could do it like in an amazing way. And what it meant was that for whatever reason, I struggled to hold a conversation with him. And I realized what it was is because I was overthinking what he was thinking, to the point that I was trying to almost figure out who controls that conversation. Does he control it or do I control it? Yeah. And I didn't realize I was doing it. So whenever we had one of those lift moments, I just had to fall back on the weather's not very good today. And that's just desperation because I don't know what else to say. And then he might respond with something like, yeah. And then that's it. I'm now thinking about, well, what do I say next? And I remember sitting with somebody and they said, you keep using the word control. And I said, yes. They said, well, stop calling it control. Why don't you go with flow? And it changed my entire my outlook, because I went from thinking I have to somehow control this situation to, well, flow with it. If he doesn't want to talk, he doesn't have to talk. And I'm happy to live in silence. Completely transformed the way I deal with people. I kid you not. I've gone from that one word, the word flow, changed my entire outlook on holding a conversation with somebody. So it can be as simple as that. You'll be amazed at what works for you. So I learned a huge amount about myself just from that one interaction, that person, the need to relinquish control in conversation, about, authority, about, trying to get into the mind of somebody else. All of these things can make you very dysfunctional, not maybe in all situations, but at least in my conversations with that person, it almost made it dysfunctional. And my problem was, what happens if I encounter somebody else like that? And what if it's somebody that's close to me or somebody that I'm working with? How do I deal with that? And I realized that actually they're not the problem. Yeah. So it's changing I don't know if this is helpful for people, but it's something that that I found when it comes to these sorts of things, that it's often the simple solutions that really help. So yes, anxiety is a part and parcel of life, but when anxiety becomes something that becomes debilitating, then it becomes a disorder, and that's where you have professionals who can support you through it. And I'm sure there may be people that know far more about it than that are listening right now. So I don't want to tread on people's toes or claim that I know. I don't want to step outside of my bounds here, because I'm not a clinician, I'm not a psychiatrist. So this is where, if somebody has that, they need to get probably help from a psychologist, maybe some therapies to help them, or help you work through it. What steps can take you to not to overreact with these feelings, anxiety, fear, etc. So there's a beautiful hadith. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said sallallahu alaihi wasallam, al-ajal min ash-shaytan, or kama qala sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He said, haste is from the devil. Yeah. And it's one of those hadiths which has so much in it. It's a few words, and yet it's so powerful, so dense. Because how often does regret come from haste? How often does regret come from haste? And the trouble is, when you try and control yourself after you've emotionally committed, then it's extremely difficult. What I mean by emotionally committed is, if you're having an argument with somebody, right? There's no good trying to hold back once you've emotionally committed to the argument. because what happens then is your sensibilities have been parked, and now it's pure emotional. This is there's three types of debate that the scholars talk about. They say there's something called munazara. Munazara, and this honestly works in relationships too. It's munazara means when two people dispute, but the disputation, the way it's managed is that if I don't agree with you, I'm going to take the time and effort to understand your worldview, your point of view. Munadara literally comes from the root words nazar, which means to look at the world through the other person's eyes. Yeah, such a powerful thing. You cannot get in, you can't go wrong if you try and look through the other person's eyes, assuming they're sincere, and they believe in what they believe in. It's that's the first level where you genuinely try and see the other person's worldview. And when you do that, even if you disagree with them, you respect them, you respect their why they concluded what they concluded, even if you don't agree with it, because you understand the rationale behind it. And that's the thing. Often arguments escalate because we don't appreciate the rationale of the other person, and what we do is we create a void and we fill that void. Typical. Yeah, you don't talk to me because you hate me. You're never at home. So what does the mind do? Well, you're never at home means you prefer to be with your friends. You obviously don't like spending time with me. You'd much rather be out there. You prefer their company over my company, and then that can go at its extreme too. And it can. And when I say extreme, it's not extreme. Actually, I would say it's fairly common, where it's, well, if you prefer them, then maybe you don't like me. But if you don't like me, then you don't love me. And if you don't love me, then you probably hate me. And you must hate me because you don't tell me. So all of that is just the void that you've just filled. Yeah. So when that person gets home, what happens? You've already emotionally committed to that argument. You might not sit there and think, nobody says I want to have an argument today. I'm really one of those moods that, and people do say that, to be fair. But my point is, hopefully most people are not sadistic in that you want to argue for the sake of arguing. What's happened is you've had an argument in your head with this fictitious version of that other person, that version of them that fits the bill that you've created in your head of that void. So that void becomes exactly what that person is. So when that guy or that woman walks into the door, you let loose, or even if you don't let loose, you speak to them with wording that's loaded and heavy with that ammunition that's been created from whatever it is that's in your mind. And then the argument kind of starts. There's no munazara. You're not looking at that person's perspective. You're just having an argument, and you may be right in a lot of what you say, but it's still, you filled it. You haven't given the other person a chance. That argument goes to the roof, because what do you think the other person is thinking? They're thinking, all I've done is literally taken one step into the house. So they might say something like, what's wrong with you? Like, why are you shouting at me for nothing? I've not done anything. And what that makes the person feel like is, what do you mean you haven't done anything? You always say that you don't understand. And then this is, I'm sure many people here, especially those who are married, might think, well, this sounds like my relationship, right? Or it may be with, maybe with a child, if you've got older children, it's probably something that's happening. And that's because we're as human beings, we're social creatures, but we're also very predictable creatures. That's how we often behave. So the way we get around it is we need to stop, take ourselves to account for that initial moment when we're filling that void, because you are doing that. You're doing it by default. Yeah, it's not like, I know people might say, I don't do it deliberately. Of course you don't do it deliberately. Who does? The void isn't something you actively fill. The void fills itself. Your job is to prevent that from happening. My job, our job, is to fill it with good, so that it doesn't happen. So this is husn al-dhan, which is why it's so highly regarded in the deen. The idea of having good opinion of somebody is so highly regarded because it means you have to actively work at it. You can't just default into having good opinion of somebody. That's often just false. When somebody just says, give them husn al-dhan, I don't want to start putting people down for saying that, but let's be honest, that was a momentary fleeting thought. Real husn al-dhan is where you actively work on it, where you really do try and think the best of people. And there are many people that do it very well. Many people it comes naturally to. And actually for many people, it doesn't come naturally to. Right? We've got to accept that too. But we all have a a role to play in trying to implement that in our lives. As I said, you need to react before you overreact, because there is no stopping that train once you've overreacted. Let's call it a day here, inshallah. And I hope this has been interesting for you, and you've learned something from this, inshallah. So we've completed the third lesson. There's a lot to say on this. As I said, there's really if we spent a month on it, we probably wouldn't get past this one couplet, because there's so much in it. But I'll probably just touch on a bit more of this couplet, because there are a few other things that I wanted to say, but I've kind of drifted off and I need to stop next week, and then we'll continue with the fourth couplet, inshallah. So jazakumullah khair.